Hi, I'm Mike Tauber, and today we're going to do a ceramic tile project. The subject matter is tulips, and we're going to be using low fire glazes, and we're going to do a beautiful drawing, and I'm going to show you how to do it from start to finish. The materials that we're going to be using are tracing paper, which is also called parchment paper, some regular graphite pencils, and then we've got these China markers. These are also called a high fire wax pencil. The color I'm using today is brown, but they come in a lot of different colors. The glazes are called low fire glazes, also known as cone 06 glazes. These are available through a lot of manufacturers at most art supply stores. We're using 6 colors. We've got a white, a sky blue, chocolate brown, watermelon red, a lime green, and a very soft, beautiful yellow. 6 colors, and all of that is going to be making our finished glaze tile. And you can see, if you look at the piece, the brown line drawing, and that's what we did with the China markers. So that's a really important note, is that these are specifically made for ceramics. So let's start looking at our photograph and our drawing. I was inspired by a photograph of some real tulips, and so I have a little rough sketch of it right here. And so in looking at my design, I'm going to put this right next to it so you can see what I'm talking about. I have 3 bulbs, and I position them on my tile. And so I worked on a sketch about the same size as the tile that I'm working with. This is an 8 by 4 inch tile, very small. And if you look at the character of the tulips, you're going to see the 3 bulbs, and I like the one coming forward like this, and then the other 2 are a little bit more upright. And then the leaves are more like blades. They're like long grassy stems, and so they're very architectural, which is one of the reasons I like this. Very simple to do and not a lot of detail. They're just long straight blades. And so they created a nice dynamic where you got these 3 circles floated over all these linear elements in back. So I think that's what makes the design really interesting. So to get started, you're going to move to your tile, but before you do, you're going to have to start with your drawing. So this is actually my sketch that I made. You want to make your sketch on a separate piece of paper and work out all the issues down there. You do not want to mess up your tile too much. You want to wait till it's perfectly resolved before you transfer it to the tile. So you can see, here's a general image of the roses, the tulips, and then this is the drawing. You can see that quite clearly. I put a lot more detail in. I changed a few of the angles around, and then I did it on the clear tracing paper. So once you finish with your drawing, you're going to position it on top of your tile, and that's when you're going to do your transferring. Because remember, you want to work out all the issues on paper first. So then you get your tile right here, you position, and we're going to transfer that onto the tile. I'll tape it on the back. And this, I forgot to mention, is a graphite transfer paper. So that's very important. You'll notice that one side is for the drawing side, and the graphite is on this side. So when you press on it, it's going to push that graphite into your ceramic tile. So you're going to slip that in between your drawing and the tile, and then you're going to pick up a pencil, and as you're pressing it, you're going to see my little scrubbing motions. And I'm rubbing that right over my entire drawing with my pencil. So I'm pushing the graphite into my ceramic tile at this point. You want to make sure you've done every little bit of your drawing. You're just going over it inch by inch, and these small scrubbing motions are what's going to get that graphite on there. So once you could pull it off and check your work every now and then to make sure that it's transferring. So once it's taped on, you never want to move it. So keep it taped on. You could peek at it, but don't change the drawing. So now I'm going to pull this out, and you could see how it's transferring right from that exact drawing right onto your tile. And so You can take this away when you're finished, and you can see that I have my whole design on here right now. Here's my drawing. And at this point, you can make any little corrections that you want to do with your regular pencil. So I might want to darken some of these things, change a few of the overlaps a little bit, or some of the area that's not missing, fill it in at this point. Make sure, like I see some missing things there. Let's finish a little more of a leaf right here. And just define your lines a little bit more at this point, because once you get to the wax pencil, you cannot change it. So that's why we want to do the drawing first, and then make sure your drawing on your tile is perfect before you get started on those wax pencils. When you're looking at the tulip flower, notice the stems are like tubes or like straws, and then the blades are flat. So be mindful of, keep looking at your drawing. A lot of times I keep mine on a computer screen nearby, and have several of them that I look back and forth between to make sure I'm getting the character of the tulip. So that's enough. Your lines just can be very softly done. Okay, so now you're done with your drawing portion. And now we're going to start with the China markers. So these China markers, the way you work with them, they're available at any art supply store. And they're made of wax. And what the wax is going to do, it's going to keep this, it's going to isolate the colors and keep them from bleeding into each other. So if you notice looking on this flower, you see all the colors are wet into wet and blended in, but we don't want it to melt into the sky and create a blur. So there's a very distinct outline and between all the colors, and that's what this wax is going to be doing. It resists, it stops the glazes from melting over, it holds it in place while it dries, and then as it's firing in the kiln, the wax will burn away and leave a beautiful burnt dark brown line, or whatever color your China marker is going to be. All right, so let's get started. The way these work, you have to be good with your little fingers, which I'm not my favorite thing, and you're going to peel away the paper. It's going to take a few tries, and then after you peel it away, it's going to end up looking like this. You want about 1/4 of an inch of the wax showing through. And so I'm right-handed, so I often smear this way, so I like to start at the top left. So if you're left-handed, you probably want to start at the top right. But the tendency for me is to smear things with my hand. Maybe you don't have that problem, but you'll notice that I like to start on the top left. So now I'm going to go right over all these pencil lines. So I'm just going to start, and notice that I'm doing that scrubbing motion again. We want that line, again, I'm going to show it to you here. Look how defined and dark that is. We want you to really scrub that wax into the tile. So I'm firm pressure without breaking the wax. If you press too hard, it'll crack. And so see how nice and dark and brown I'm getting? And if you notice my design, I don't do a lot of rounded lines. I think that as your glazes are firing, they tend to round off. Everything tends to round off when you're doing ceramic tile. So I like to square it off in the drawing, and ultimately it's going to end up looking very rounded anyway. So do you see how I'm making these long straight lines, going over it at least twice? You're scrubbing that in this way, and you're scrubbing it in that way. Nice and slow. And again, if you don't like your pencil line, you could even make little changes right now at this point too. So each time it's getting better. Okay, so you could start to see the rows right over there. I think I got all my lines done. And let's move into a blade of grass over to the left. And these long straight lines, I like to make sure there's overlaps. That gives you a little bit of three-dimensional look to your drawing. Okay. So let's see, I'm drawing in the stem of that tulips right now. There's one of the upper blades, and you could see how that's all coming along. Okay, so now we've got that all completed. And you're really going to want to look closely, make sure you didn't make any mistakes. Look at your design and your paper drawing. And I'm going to look at that and just make sure, hold it up against it and look again to make sure I hadn't left anything off. It looks really good to me right now. This is the point also, if you want to sign your piece in wax is how you want to do it. It's much easier to do it in wax than in the glaze. So my name is Mike Tauber, so I'm going to put a little letter T right there. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but some people like to sign their art. So that's what I did right there, the letter T. Okay, I think it's time to start putting on our glazes. So remember, we've got 6 colors. On a complicated design like this, it's very hard to tell what is the figure, what is the ground. So most of the time I'll start with the foreground items, but in this case, I'm going to start with the background. And if you notice, the background is this blue sky. And I'm going to tell you, in this design, just get all your blues blocked in. It will really make things a lot easier for you in the case of this design. Because you could see, it's very confusing what color goes where here. So you want to be careful to refer to your photograph all the time. So my glazes are put in a little bottle, plastic bottles. They come in large jars, very large jars. And I put them in these little plastic bottles. These are called detailers. And so I think it holds like 3 ounces. And so there's a cap, and then you refill them. You just pour the glaze into here, and then you fill it up like that. You snip the top off with scissors, and that's how you're going to get it open. I want to tell you that sometimes it's hot weather, your glazes are going to get clogged. And I always have this little thing nearby. It's actually a poker, but it's just a paper clip that I bent into a long straight shape. And when your glaze clogs, it's going to happen to you quite a bit. You're going to push that poker right into there, and it's just going to clear the nozzle. Everything's water-based and non-toxic right now, so don't worry too much about health issues. Everything's washable with soap and water. So you see how that rinsed off really nicely. I keep it sitting here soaking close by for whenever it clogs. This is also another poker you can get at the ceramic shop. I'm not sure if these are available at art stores, but you can do this one also. So this one's a little bit easier. There's a bigger handle on it, but I tend to lose them. So just a bent paper clip will do. This is my jar of water, and I've also got these little brushes here. For a small design like this, you're just going to need about 2 to 3 brushes. So we're going to be working with brushes, and we're going to be working with our detailer, our squeeze bottle. So I keep my brushes right off to the side here. Now remember, I said we're going to start with our sky blue, which is the background on this design. So I'm going to take my little detailer, and again, I tend to smear things because I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start on the upper left. And I'm going to start squeezing the glaze in. And the glaze is kind of like, almost like the consistency of yogurt. So I like to pull it right into the corner, and you want to run it right up to the edge of your wax line. And you want to be thick and generous with this stuff. You think you've covered it, but actually low fire glazes really require 3 coats or 2 super thick coats of glaze. So now I want to show you how that wax resist line is working. So I'm going to push the glaze right up to it, and to see how it just stops right there. It's like the walls of a swimming pool. You're filling it with the water, and the walls are the wax. They're holding it in place, and it allows you to put that stuff on a lot more thickly and consistently. So I work to completion, wet into wet, and look how thick I'm putting that on there. And to see, I'm going to show you, look really closely right there where it didn't go into that corner. You want to be careful that doesn't happen. So you can trail it right into that little nook and cranny there. And it's really important. And look how important that is in the fired tile. Do you see that little area filled in there? It really helps create a lot of definition. So if you have to stop while you're in the middle of glazing a big open area like this, say I had to stop and answer the phone or something, you never want to leave a hard line like that because it's going to show in the firing. So then you're just going to take your brush, say I have to stop for 5 minutes, I'm just going to thin it into the tile a little bit like that because I have to stop and walk away. So you want to create a little soft bleed like that. The brushes can wash in regular water like that, nice and easy. And this is where I have to leave it if I have to walk away. Then I'm going to come back to it after my phone call or whatever I did and continue on. So I'm just going to pick up that color again and just fade it right back into where you left off and carry on. So I'm going to bring it all the way down. And again, you want to pull it into those little corners there. That makes a big difference in your finished piece. And in little areas like this, you can just drop it in and look at that, super thick. And see how the wax just keeps it in place? That's really what you want. And here's what it's going to look like. You see how shiny and rich and thick these are? That's what makes the tile look so three-dimensional and beautiful. So you could really feel the bumpiness, and that's why I want you to put your glazes on super, super thick, and you should go over each of the colors at least sometimes twice to get that thickness. So especially in these areas, I like to just drop it in like that, and it'll kind of spread out right where you want it to be. So let's go, I'm going to show you how to make a mistake. All right, so let's say we're making a mistake. All right, so this is our background sky. Again, I'm looking at my drawing. Very careful, but ultimately you're going to make a mistake. So there's my stem, there's my leaves. Let's say I accidentally colored in the flower. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Okay, there's two things to do. The good thing to do is just don't touch it, let it dry, because you're going to smear up your whole painting, and just let it set. You're going to go over it another time after it dries. Or you can mop it up if you've got a little room. I take a little bit of a wet brush, just with a little bit of water on it, and I'm just going to mop it up without creating a big mess on my tile. See how I picked up a little bit of it there? Rinse out your brush. Let's mop it up. Twirl your brush and it's absorbing. And to see how I'm getting that glaze off of the mistake area. Got to do it while it's still wet. And that's good enough. So you really need to know how to do that because it is going to happen. So it didn't mess up the wax line. And see how I got most of the glaze off? That's fine because we're going to cover it in another color. And these glazes are pretty much opaque. So don't worry too much about it. Let it dry. If you were in a really tight space, like right in here, and you made a mistake, don't even mop it up because you're going to mess up your whole tile. Just let it dry, and you're going to go over it 2 or 3 times with the new color. All right, so do you see here, again, not good, where I missed that little space? You want to go right up into those nooks and crannies. And look at how I'm pouring this in. Okay, so you can start to see where the background's getting filled in, and you can start to see the design coming out. We're going to finish this piece and let it dry. Okay, so now the piece has dried, and I put my second coat on, and you can see that it looks kind of like cake frosting, really, really thick. It should look three-dimensional. If any areas look too flat, you could go over them a second or third time, and that wax is going to hold them in place. So see how nice and thick it is? You really want it to look like thick, like a peanut butter on a sandwich or frosting on a cake. Nice and bumpy. So our next step is going to be putting the shadows down on the stems and the leaves and also on the buds. So my shadow color, as you can see, if you look at this design, I'm trying to create a little push and pull. You see the lighter foreground things and then these darker areas falling back. So to get the darker, we're going to start with just the solid chocolate brown color. That's this color right here, and you can start to see it underneath those leaves there. And we're starting with a foundation of the dark because it's going to start building up our shadows. So this is kind of up to you. You want to you could take a regular graphite pencil, not your China pencil. Take a graphite pencil and you might write the word D. You could decide which ones you want dark. It's easier to work it out like this and not make mistakes. So let's say this one's going to be D. Those are going to be my darks, and the others are going to be my lights. Okay, so you want to indicate dark or light. Or you could put yourself little notes on each one so you don't make mistakes. So the D's are going to get this. Again, looking at this design, you can see where the darks are really down here at the bottom and the leaves get a little bit lighter as they're up near the top. We have a little bit of a light source coming in from the top, and so the dark is down here at the bottom. It's going to make those leaves at the bottom fall back. It's like the theory of regular painting at this point. Okay, you could see where I made a little bit of mistake and I went over the line. So all you do is take your little brush and you could twist and twirl it back into where it belongs. See, I did a twisting motion. You probably want to test your glazes on a scrap piece of tile. You could play around with them so you understand the consistency before you get to the actual art tile that you're working on. Probably good to practice a little bit. So I'm going over my D's and I'm going to get the dark brown, that deep chocolate brown. And notice that my finished tile reads green, but the brown underneath it is going to create a little bit of a darkness underneath. So I'm putting in all these darks. That one's dark. I like having dark on both the bottom corners. It kind of creates a little bit of a frame or a weight at the bottom for your finished piece. So you'll notice that I put my darks in both of the corners and kind of all along the bottom. Okay, so in this point, you're going to take your little brush and you can feather some of those, feather them up a little bit. And just kind of leave the thick buildup at the bottom. So I'm going to paint a little bit of brown onto all these leaves down here because I like having that deep, dark foundation at the bottom of my finished piece. Now also, to create that sense of depth, our light source is coming from the top left, so I notice that there's some shadows underneath the bulbs, the tulip bulbs. This is on the stem. It's going to make the bulbs look like they're coming forward. See, there's a little bit of a dark shadow underneath there. So let's put a little bit of a dark shadow under each of the stems. And I'm going to put a little bit of dark here behind this leaf, behind this tulip bulb, and it's going to make the bulb stand out and that leaf behind it fall further back. Take your brush and just kind of blur it into that leaf. And then we're going to move on to the bulbs, the flower bulbs also. So if you're looking at the bulbs, they're tulips are made of these petals, and but they're all kind of bundled together. So you'll see the lighter outside areas of it, and then the deeper parts have the deeper shadow in them. So that's where we're going to put our dark brown. You see the light right there, and you see the dark right there. So we're going to look at our drawing very carefully. You also see it right here. This one's really obvious to look at. The very light at the top, and it transitions down to the dark color down here. Light at the top transitions down to the dark. So especially the inside of these tulips, we like a very dark section right in the middle of the bulb. It's like there's a hole in there. So the chocolate brown is going to give us that deep dark foundation that we like. And then I'm going to also put some on the insides of each of these petals to show you. The brighter ones are more on the outside and the darker ones are more on the inside. So you can see I'm using this, again, the chocolate brown straight out of the bottle. And then we're going to take our brush and blend it up a little bit. So we're creating our three-dimensional look. So remember, it's dark over there. We're going to put a little bit of brown here. And this is starting to give us our light and shadow areas. Very dark over here. And I'm going to put some dark on this side. I think I'm going to put a little extra dark right here on this one. And you're starting to see, especially on my sample here, how it's going to read. You see that light color here? That's that pure red watermelon color. And then the dark chocolate brown is going to create that deep depth in there. And it creates a three-dimensional look to the piece. Okay, we're going to let that dry and we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so now that my dark shadow areas have been blocked in and finished, I'm going to be doing the stems, the foliage. So we're going to bring back a little bit of the brown. We're going to do what I call a wet into wet on the tile. So what I'm going to do, because the brown is going to create a nice underpainting under the green, but I'm going to want a little bit more brown down at the bottom. So what I like to do is wet into wet right on the tile. So again, I'm going to add a little bit of wet here at the bottom, and we're going to brush it right here on the tile. If you're not comfortable with that, you may do your wet into wet off to the side, because we're going to do a brown and green. So this is our green. Remember, one of our 6 colors. You can mix it here. You can mix it in a little cup. I like to mix mine on the tile because I think it creates a little bit more of a dramatic effect. So I'm putting my brown down, a nice thick second coat of brown. Let's say we're doing it in these 3 areas. And then you could squeeze it out of your detailer, or you could scoop it out of your mixing tray. And at the top, I'm using more just of the green. So what we're doing is creating a bleed. For those of you that do watercolor, that's kind of the same technique. You'll feel pretty comfortable doing this. You're working what's called wet into wet. And you could see just how that green is bleeding beautifully into the dark brown there. I'm just pulling it down. And you could actually see the transition even before it's dried. And what we're creating is this darkness down here. And it bleeds up to a lighter color at the very top. So let's do a little more wet into wet. I'm going to use the brush at this point mixed in with some of my brown. And I want to keep the deepest browns at the bottom of my composition. And remember, we want a little bit of push and pull. You could see how it's dark there, then it goes light, then that one's even lighter. So for example, on this one, I'm going to use mostly just pure green. And there's a little bit of brown underneath there that will show through after it's fired. Okay, you're gonna see that I made a little splatter right there. And what you can do is just scrape it with a pin or a poker, and just scrape that green off of the previously dried area. And it's gone. If you are worried about messing up your whole tile, then you can wait till it dries and scrape it off later with a razor blade or any kind of little scraper. Okay, so now I'm going to do this really big blade right here. So this one is just going to be solid green. And what I like about the point of these, it's easier to get into that little space, easier than a brush. So you really want to use a lot of control. And these little detailers work really well pushing right up against that wax line. And see how I'm just pouring it in nice and thick. And the wax lines are going to hold it in place. Okay, I'm getting down to the bottom now, and I want to bring a little bit more of that brown again. I think I didn't put enough there the first time. So you can do wet into wet. Squeeze a little brown right onto your tile. My favorite technique is this wet into wet look. And it keeps it from looking too flat and makes it look more like a beautiful painting. So there's my brown, and I'm just going to blend these two together a little bit to create a beautiful wet into wet bleed that's going to look really great when it fires. So see how it's nice and creamy, like the texture of yogurt. And so it's really workable, in my mind, easier than watercolor. So see how I'm getting, this leaf has a little more brown on it. On that one I put more green and creates that push and pull. So now I'm going to do the stem. Sometimes you just want to have a little bit of brown in your mixing tray and interact using some of your brush, and other times you're just going to use your detailer. So there's the stem of that bottom rose there. And I left a little bit at the bottom. If your brush gets too loaded, wipe it out in water. Maybe pick another brush dryer. That one jumped over the wax line, so I'm just going to scoop it up. And the wax line will remain. Okay, so we're going to go and do all of our blades. Be careful to keep looking at your photograph or your drawing to make sure you're still in the right area. That's enough of the green there, and I'm going to bring some brown back in at the bottom. And create that nice brown buildup along my bottom edge that I really like. So the leaves start out brown, and as they go to the top, they have a nice green to them. But then we're going to add highlights on them also. So each of your stems is a little bit of a different mixture of the green and the brown. Okay, let's go on to this stem over here. I'm just going to, there's a certain transparency to these glazes, so if you put on super thin, it's going to show that brown is going to show through after it fires. So if I put my green on very thin, that brown, it'll fire together and it's going to be a greenish brown. And so you could see these beautiful variations as you're looking at this piece. This one I mostly used just the green. This one had a lot of brown in the bottom. And I'm going to show you about these highlight colors a little bit later. So let's go and get all these stems finished, and then we're going to move on to the tulip bulbs. Okay, so we've gotten all of our the stems blocked in. You still can see we already put the browns in on the bulbs. We've let it dry. The reason I like to let it dry in between each section is because if you make a mistake, it's easier to scrape it off. If you start getting wet into wet, if something wet here blends into that, it's harder to clean. So it really is good to let it dry for, it takes 4 or 5 minutes in between color group, and everything here has dried really nicely. If you look really closely, you could see my brown in here and those dark brown backgrounds. This will be a brighter green, and look at, I could tell that these bleeds are gonna look really nice. They're gonna look just like that. And so on top of these leaves, I'm gonna add a thin wash of this is that soft yellow color. And you can, I put it on really heavily there. It reads kind of whitish, but it's actually a little bit of a soft yellow, and that's gonna bring a little bit of warmth and liminess to the tops of our leaves. So this is, again, this is the soft yellow that I'm putting on top of the green. It's just gonna add a little bit more impact. You could take the soft yellow, and I'm gonna work wet into wet. And let's try a little bit of this green, and I'm just gonna put it on with this very thin brush. So grab a little bit of that green, and I like to mix it right on the artwork. It just makes it more interesting. So I'm pulling that green up to the top, and I'm gonna have the tips of my leaves be really that soft yellow color. Let's pull in some, wipe off your brush, clean it, grab some more of the green. I'm using that green and yellow right now. And as I'm pulling the green upward, slowly dragging it into that soft yellow color. And you could really see it's already it's already visible at that point. And it's gonna create like a light source at the very top. Wipe out your brush. I'm gonna use a little bit of a bigger brush for the next section. So let's show you how we're doing that bleed again here with our soft yellow. Remember, you can build up as many layers as you want. All right, so I want that yellow highlight on that blade, so I'm gonna squeeze, that's the white, this is the yellow. I have number codes on the bottom of my detailer, so I know what color's inside there. Oop. So in that point, we had a problem. We got to get our poker out. We got a clog. Clean it out with your poker, stick it back in the water. And see how I'm painting in that yellow highlight, but leave the green there. If you look at that really close, you could see the green, it's all green here, and then that soft yellow is going to create a little bit of a light source up there. Right there, it's a little harsh. So on this one, I'm doing a little bit more blended look, a little softer. And so if you want to, just put some of this in your mixing tray, some of the yellow, and I'm just going to add a few soft highlights onto top of some of these leaves right here. If you put it on really thin, you won't be able to notice it. So the way you control the density of your color is how much you put on. So I'm gonna put a little bit more, just add a few highlights here to break up these leaves. That one's gonna come out a little further. If you want the yellow to really be seen, then you put on a thicker coat of it. So you could put the highlights on directly with your detailer, especially in that small area. It's too hard to brush in. So look at the control you get with these detailers. I pull it right up to the end. Have a dry brush nearby to wipe up any excess like that and twirl it back in. So now all of our blades are done. We have the browns. We added our yellow highlights over the green. And here we have some beautiful green bleeds. And it creates a lot of nice variation in the leaves. Notice that I put a lot of yellow on this one. It kind of gives it a foreground look, and this one has a lot more brown in it, which pushes it further back. So we got more of the layering in there. Okay, so next, these are fine, and I'm going to move on to the actual bulbs, the tulip bulbs. So our two colors are we have the deep brown, which you can see right inside there. It's very deep and dark. There it is in my example. And you see I put that brown in there earlier. So in cases like that where you really want to stay very dark, we're going to take, this is our red, which I call it's kind of a watermelon red. But you know, you can actually do your tulips, they come in so many different colors. I just chose the red. I thought it looked good, this watermelon red. And you always want to test your detailer somewhere else off to the side, so you don't squirt it all over your beautiful finished artwork. Be very careful. So this one is coming out really nicely, see? All right. Because it's happened where I've squeezed it and it all comes shooting out all over the tile. All right, so let's, no, before we start that, before we go into the red, we're gonna put these white highlights in. This is something that I just do as a stylistic feature, but I think it gives a little bit of extra sparkle to the tile, is I put on these are a warm white highlight. You might wanna also try it in a warm pink if you wanted to. But I put the white in there and it creates a little bit of a dynamic punctuation to these flowers, like little sparkle. So it's a stylistic thing that I like to do. And I'm putting that down before I put the red down. So here we go with the white, and I'm just putting a very thick edge where I want my highlights to be. My light source is coming in from the top left. So the white lines are hitting from the top left. And what it's gonna do is kind of give a little bit of an edge to the tulip petals. So you could see where I did it here. It's not necessarily too visible here. If you look on your, if you look on the image, you do see a little bit of white underlighting here, especially on the color photograph. And you could see some white tips on the tops of these flowers that give it a little bit of a impact. So I'm doing the same thing here, just keeping it on the top left of the petals. Top left, right on top of that flower where the light's hitting it on the top. So you're doing your top and your left. And these detailers, if you practice with them on a separate piece of paper, you really learn good control. Your hand might get a little bit tired from squeezing a lot. Take a break. And I'm pushing it right up to the edge of that wax China marker line. And I'm putting it on really thick so that when it fires, it will remain, it won't go away. Okay, so those are all the highlights that I've wanted. You can see how similar they are. And let's cap up that white. And now we're gonna move into our watermelon color. So I'm gonna put this on super thick. Let's just start up here and put it into this, there's a little bit of water in there. I'm gonna shake it up a little. Let's test it off to the side to make sure it's okay. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm gonna just fill in this flower with my watermelon and let that white line show. Don't go all the way over it. See over there, this is the area that I'm working on. I let the white line show. It's okay if it mixes in a little bit, it's just a little white highlight. Look at, again, how thickly I'm pulling this in. Super, super thick. I can't stress that enough. So that's actually like putting 2 or 3 layers of glaze on there if you did it with a brush. That's why I like to use a detailer, because you can get it on a lot thicker, and you're not really spreading it around, you're just laying it in and leaving it. Take a real close look at how thick that is. Again, it's like yogurt, and you want it as thick as frosting on a cake or a peanut butter sandwich. So it's okay if you go over the wax line a little bit because the wax will come back in the kiln. But you might want to take your tiny little brush and just pick up a little bit. I twirl the brush as I'm scooping it out. Just twirl it away and pull it away from that section. So now you see that I'm putting my watermelon color. I'm going to put some of it over the brown. If you put a thin bit of it over the brown will come through, which is what you want. See, I'm just doing a little thin, I'm brushing on a little thin bit of it on the brown, and that's what's going to allow the brown to show through. So over in a case like this flower, see how I put the brown inside the petals in that little deep dark area? And that's what we're going to look for. So I'm going to be putting the brighter watermelon, thicker, brighter watermelon up here, and thinner as it gets over the brown. So you're going to see more of the brown firing through and more of the watermelon red up at the top. So again, very thick where you want mostly watermelon red, and very thin. You could just put a little bit on over that brown to knock it down and make it look, it'll just have a hint of the watermelon red. So let's go over all of our flowers. Just going to start filling these in. And you're going to know that those wax lines are going to hold it in place. And look at, you can really build it up and it's going to spread. Okay, I went over my line. The sky was already dry, so we could just pull it right off of there. Wash out your brush. And that's how I cleaned up a mistake. You make sure your brush is really clean. And that wax line is going to come back and it's going to look just like that in the kiln. Okay, so you could take your brush and just kind of fill in the tiny little areas. Filling it in, leaving that white line show. That one looks complete. I missed an area right here. As it dries, it's going to start shrinking and you could go over it a second time. Okay, let's move down to our third flower down here. Again, where we want the brown to show, the deepest, darkest brown. And you can go in and add a little bit more brown if you want to also. So you can mix these two, wet into wet. So see how I'm mixing the wet and the watermelon color in? You can do that also. Add a little extra brown if you want it to be extra dark down there. So this is an area that reads as the reddish watermelon and the deep chocolate brown. Let's pull some of this. If you're more comfortable working with a brush, that's fine. And then I'm going to lay some solid watermelon color along the top because we want our lightest colors at the top. You could see that's where it's going to be the light watermelon, and down here we didn't put as much of the red down, it's more of the brown. So you're going to get that nice deep crevice in there. Start on this one. I'm going to go right up to the white and let that white remain. Nice and thick. This is the watermelon red color. Okay, I'm seeing a little area right there. It's very difficult to get in there, so I'm going to take a little bit with my brush and just kind of dab it in. This is that little area right there. Okay, it's okay if it's kind of bumpy. I think that adds to the finished product after it's fired. Okay, so we're gonna look at this and then decide if you want to put any other highlights or shadows on. Let's look at this a little bit and spread that around with the brush. If you want to put a teeny bit over the white line, it'll end up, see how it melts into each other, wet into wet, and it makes a really nice little pink highlight. So you can very slightly wash right up into that white highlight you put on before, if you don't want it to look like pure white. That's the pure white right there. But if you go over it a little bit like this, it's going to give it a little soft pink look to it. That's really nice. Okay, so this is our piece. It's all complete. We do have to let it completely dry. You want to let it dry at least 2 or 3 hours, depending on the temperature, before you put it in the kiln. Again, these are cone 06 glazes. So I usually wait till I have a full kiln. I'll fire it overnight. And after the piece comes out, this is what it's going to look like. These pieces, the great thing about ceramic tile is it'll tolerate full sun. So if you want to hang it out on your patio, you could put a backing on the back. You could cement it into your garden wall, into the stucco. It's fully weather resistant, and the color's permanent even in full sun. So this is what you see on those tile murals on the outside of buildings. And these are the tulips, and good luck on your project. Thanks so much.